Breaking news for the real estate industry in the United States. This just in, as of Tuesday, April the 23rd, the judge in the NAR Commission settlement lawsuit has come out and pre-approved the settlement, calling it fair, reasonable, and adequate. And we now have a timeline as to what's about to happen.
Gary, this is very exciting. Now, obviously, it has not been approved, but a pre-approval indicates that things are definitely going in the right direction to resolve the whole situation. Now, if you want to learn about the settlement details itself, we encourage you to go check out our YouTube channel. We've done a number of different videos and episodes where we talk about the details of the practice changes that are going to take into effect. But the timeline is essential because when we need to be ready to make the changes is very important if you're trying to figure out what needs to happen and when does it need to happen by. And so, Gary, we have the timeline that the National Association of Realtors published. And I think this is super useful. It is estimated. I'm going to underline the word there, estimated. But I think this gives everyone some peace of mind to know that, okay, based on what the National Association of Realtors says, based on when the final approval, the final court hearing approval is, that this is what we, I don't know if the word expect is the word. However, this is what we could probably predict, most probable situation. Now, of course, things could change between now and then, but this is something that we can wrap our minds around so we can get ready and be prepared.
Yeah, and I think most importantly, it's really critical for us to understand that according to this settlement, the National Association of Realtors did agree to put into place before the settlement is approved, and what they're looking at is mid to late July, that these changes will go into effect for all of us realtors in the United States prior to full approval. Now, full approval, they're looking at by end of year. So that could be December 31st. We're not really sure there. But what's critical here, Chris, is that we as real estate agents and realtors in the United States must be adhering to these new practices that we still don't know exactly what they are, but we will have to adhere to them by the end of July. And that, again, is estimated.
Well, we know what some of them are. Like there's some big ones, right? Like having a buyer's representation agreement signed before showing a buyer property. That's a practice change that we can be ready for. We also know that there's going to be changes to the MLS in terms of what information can be available and what cannot be available. So those are all things that we can, and so the timeline actually reveals some of those things. So I think it's worthy and worthwhile to step through the timeline and just give everyone a better understanding of what's going on here. Now, if you
That sounds great. Can you walk us through this,
Yes,
Chris, so
yeah, yeah.
everybody has these dates?
Well, I find that it's helpful just to start at the beginning when you're looking at a timeline, even though it's in the past. It's helpful to start at the beginning. So, we look at on March 15th, the NAR settlement agreement was signed. On March 22nd, the NAR files notice of settlement, withdrawals, pending motions, and seeks to stay the litigation. All right, so that was recent history. Now, what we have is in April 19th, which is very recent history, a plaintiff's file motion for preliminary approval, right? So this is looking to get a pre-approval to the settlement, and then late April decision on preliminary approval estimated. That has happened, right? So the judge has said, yes, we are going to give that preliminary approval. Now,
Yeah, within 4 days, that's what's really interesting. The judge acted very, very quickly. Within 4 days of the plaintiffs filing that motion, he did a preliminary approval on it. So that was really, really rapid response.
I think that's, I don't want to read too much into it, but if they didn't have to take a long time, I don't know if how in the movies, when juries take a long time, usually it's because people are disagreeing, but when it happens really fast, it's because it was kind of a unanimous decision. And it seems like, I don't want to read too much into it, but it definitely seems like there wasn't a lot of back and forth on it. Was yes. What were the words that you said that the judge said?
Fair, reasonable, and adequate.
Yes. Okay. So let's now look at what the future holds for us, right? So it says June 18th, deadline for Realtor MLSs to execute Appendix B in order to include as a released party. I believe that is for those Realtor MLSs who want to be a part of the settlement. Is that correct? If it's your reading of that?
That's my understanding as well.
Same thing. Deadline for brokerages to execute Appendix C in order to be included as a released party, meaning June 18th then is when the MLSs, when the brokerages, when they have to basically say we want to be a part of this settlement or not. Is that the way you read that?
All right.
Okay, so that's June 18th. Then we're looking at late July. Now, earlier on during when the information was first being shared, I think it said mid-July, but it looks like it's
They
shifted.
said mid-July, but Chris, you and I were talking about this. There's so much that goes into this. So many different changes have to happen at different state and local levels and with MLSs and everything like that. So there's a lot of work that the boards and the MLSs have to actually do to figure out what are we going to do to adhere to these things. And so I think they're like, can we bump it a little bit?
Hey, I don't blame them, and I don't envy their position. It's just a tremendous amount of detail and things to work out. So many scenarios and circumstances to make sure that the practice changes are going to be able to cover most of them. And so I think late July, but that's for us a really good read on to when do we need to be ready for everything that we can be ready for. And then it looks like here, August 17th, the earliest date for plaintiffs to issue class notice. Now, I don't actually understand. Gary, what do you read that as?
I'm not an attorney, and I'm not even going to attempt to read into that.
That seems like that's lawyerese for something. So we'll move on to the next piece, which is September 16th here, which is Realtor MLSs and opting in non-Realtor MLSs and brokerages implement practice changes by this date. Now, I'm assuming what they're saying here is by September 16th is when the offer of buyer-broker compensation can no longer be entered in any field in the MLS. And that's how I read that. Would you agree with that?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's what I agree with.
So in terms of so actually that gives a little bit of insight to the practice changes that will be taking effect in July. Probably is around potentially the buyer's representation agreement and having that signed before showing properties, since they're giving the MLSs a little bit more time to be able to pull that information out of the MLS. If you read it as that September 16th is the deadline for them to make those changes. And it looks like late September or sometime in September, anticipated motion in support of final approval. So that looks like there's probably some sort of court legal process before they can get to the stage of final approval that they have to put in place. And then they're looking at November 22nd as the estimated day for the hearing for that final approval. So I think the big dates in there for us to pay attention to are that late July timeframe, and
Yep,
then
that's going to be critical.
that mid-September timeframe. Those, if
Right.
you're an agent, if you're a broker, those seem to be the big dates that we should be concerned about because they affect our preparation and our practice changes. Well, Gary, that's the timeline, or the estimated timeline for the upcoming milestones and the changes that are happening with the NAR settlement and the pre-approved NAR settlement. And if you would like help or more information to prepare for the changes, we encourage you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and check us out at thepaperlessagent.com. We'll see you in our next video.